Hello everyone, Kendra Meredith here from Mrs. Meredith Makes. Today is my first of many sewing tutorials and I'm really excited to get started. But before we do, I wanted to share a little bit about my sewing history. I started sewing around 8 years old and my mother is the one who taught me how to sew. I also competed in sewing competitions in middle school and high school through a club called 4-H, and I also went to college for apparel studies. I am currently a middle school family consumer science teacher and I have 10 years experience teaching students how to sew. But I'm ready to share my passion with a broader audience, so therefore I am starting some sewing tutorials. So let's go get started. The three basic hand stitches that we're going to start out with today are 2 edge stitches and 1 normal stitch. So the normal stitch is the running stitch. This is the most used stitch in hand sewing. But then there's some decorative stitches, like for example, the blanket stitch that goes on the edge of a garment or a craft. And then finally is the whip stitch. This is another super user-friendly stitch with a lot of different uses. The supplies that you will need today is a piece of scrap fabric, a sewing needle, some scissors to trim your thread. You can use all-purpose thread that you can get at Walmart or your local craft store, or embroidery floss. Today I'm going to use embroidery floss because it's a little bit easier to see on video. So the first stitch that we're gonna do is the whip stitch. But before we do that, we're gonna have to thread our needle. So I'm using, again, 3 strands of embroidery floss. When you buy it, there's about 6 strands together, so you will have to separate. So I just separated it in half and pulled it apart really slow. But we want to hold the thread very close to the edge so there's not a lot of give. Then we're going to thread the eye of the needle. So you just take the edge and thread your needle. The embroidery floss will be a little bit finicky because there are 3 strands, but you're going to pull it through the needle and pull the thread down to about halfway. Okay, so that way, whenever you pull through, you won't pull your thread out of the eye. Next, you need to tie a knot at the end of your longest strand. So I like to do this with an X knot. I'm not sure if that's the technical term, but you'll see why it's called that in just a second. So I'm going to take my index finger and hold the thread with my thumb and just wrap it around until I make an X. I'm going to put my thumb right on top of the X and roll it off my finger. Okay, once I've rolled it off my finger, I'm going to take my middle finger, put it right before the circle. So see, there's a little bit of a circle. Okay, it's not necessarily a knot yet. So I'm going to put my middle finger right over the top and pull. Okay, and that makes me a substantial knot that won't come through my fabric. All right, so to start the whip stitch, I need to hide my knot because we don't want the knot to show on the front of our project or on the back. So if possible, you want to sandwich it in between the 2 pieces of fabric. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just push my needle through the top layer, pull my knot tight, and then now you can see that the knot is between the 2 pieces. So then I hold those 2 pieces together, and then I'm going to go around to the back and then pull through, and I've just made my first whip stitch. Okay, so then I'm going to do that again. I'm going to go to the back, through the front, and then pull tight. Okay, then that makes my second whip stitch. And then I keep doing that all the way down my project. I'm being careful to focus on spacing to kind of make those stitches look a little consistent in the length and how far apart they are. Okay, so I would go all the way down to the end, but for sake of time today, I'm going to go ahead and tie it off. So again, we want the knots to kind of be hidden, so we're going to tie it off on the back. So I'm going to go around as if I was going to make another stitch, but I'm actually going to turn over my project and slide my needle through the last stitch that I made. Okay, so I pull it through, but I'm going to be sure to pull it real slow. And now I have a loop left. So I'm going to go back through my loop and then pull tight. So then that will knot my thread. And just for sake of security, I'm going to loop it one more time. Okay, then I'm going to clip it real close to my knot, and now I have a stitch that will stay. The second stitch that I want to go over today is called the running stitch. So again, you want to knot the end of your thread by taking it between your index finger and your thumb, wrapping it around till you make an X, put your thumb on the X and roll it off your finger and then pull tight. Okay, so then you have a substantial knot. The running stitch is going to be right in the middle for me today, but you could put the running stitch on the edge. A running stitch is just a utility stitch, basically. You can use it anywhere that it is needed. So since I'm doing it in the middle, I want to make sure that my knot is on the back of my project. So I'm going to go ahead and start from the back and go to the front and pull tight until my knot stops me. Then I'm going to go back through from the top down and pull tight. And then I'm going to come back up from the bottom through the top and pull tight. And so as you can see, I'm starting to create my running stitches. I want to try to keep them spaced evenly and the length as even as possible so that it has a nice, clean look. All right, so once I get the stitches that I need, again, I'm gonna tie it off on the back. So I flip it over and I go through my last stitch and then I pull my thread through, but I keep that loop right there because I'm gonna thread my needle through the loop so that I can tie a knot. I'm gonna do that one more time for sake of security. I do not want my thread to come out because then my project will fall apart. So I pull tight and there's my knot. I'll go ahead and trim my thread. And so then I have the back of my stitch where I have both knots where you can see but then the front of the stitch is nice and clean and you can't see any of the knots. So for our final stitch today is another edge stitch called the blanket stitch. This one's a little bit more complicated because it is a little bit of a fancier embroidery type stitch. So let's get started. So again, I want to make sure that I hide my knot on the back. So I'm going to start from the back, push my needle through to the front, and pull until my knot stops me. There we go. Then for this one, I'm going to go back around to the back and try to push my needle through where my knot is. So it's basically the thread and the needle are coming out of seemingly the same position. So I pull that through. But before I pull it tight, I'm going to leave this loop. And I'm going to thread my needle through the loop and pull tight. So that's made my first stitch, okay? But now I'm gonna go again. So from the back to the front, I'm gonna pull almost all the way tight, but I have this loop, and then I'm going to thread my needle through the loop and pull tight. Okay, and that's my first blanket stitch. So then I'm going to do the same thing again. So from the back to the front, I'm going to pull through until almost tight, but I still have my loop. I'm going to take my needle right through the loop and pull tight. Okay, and so I'm going to keep doing that all the way down my project. So from the back to the front, leaving a loop, needle goes through the loop and pulls tight. Okay, so as you can see, on the edge, I have my thread, and then on the front, I have my stitches. All right, so now that I have a few blanket stitches, I'm gonna go ahead and tie it off. So again, I always go to the back to tie off my threads. So I'm gonna go through the last stitch that I made. So I just thread it right through. I pull almost tight, but see, I still have that little loop. I'm gonna thread my needle through the loop and pull tight. And I'm gonna do that one more time just for security of my stitches not coming back out. All right, then I just clip and you are done. So that's all I had for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed learning the basic hand stitches, and I hope this is the start to your sewing journey, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel as well as following me on Facebook and Instagram at Mrs. Meredith Makes. See you next time. Bye.